Namaste. Namaste and welcome to Nepal Dialogue UK 9th episode in the webinar series. Today we are here to organize a talk by Dr. Swarnim Wagle. Before I introduce him, let me briefly remind you about the Nepal Dialogue UK and the team. The team behind Nepal Dialogue UK includes Lokendra Purush Dhakal, who is the Executive Director of Centre for Nepal History UK, Naresh Kapangi Magar, who is co-convener of the dialogue, and Susma Basnet is a member, and Dr. Sangeeta Shrestha is a media coordinator. Today's event, we are facing some practical challenges. Both a speaker and I'm moderator Krishna Adhikari, both are in Nepal. And Swarnim is even in more remote place, close to Mount Everest, I think, area. So the challenges are both related to, the technical challenges. We might be caught off the Wi-Fi. I'm also facing some power issues. So I have asked Naresh Kapangi to step in for me. But if Swarnim faces technical issue, then I think we will have no choice but to close it. I just would like to remind you basic rules that we have. This presentation would take about 30 minutes, followed by question and answers. And as usual, we will keep all our participants muted. If you'd like to ask any question or make any comment, you are welcome to do that in our chat room. You can write in English or Nepali Roman, and we'll take it from there. So please stay muted at all time. Today's talk is on redressing Nepal's twin deficits: democratic decay and lagging development. I mean, we primarily were very keen to hear about Nepal's economy, but since Swarnim also is involved in governance and politics and other aspects, I think he has given us this title, which is very important in today's circumstances. Let me briefly introduce Swarnim, I think, who requires no introduction at all. He's almost a celebrity in just looking at the fans following in his social media pages. You can tell that. Swarnim is a member of parliament in Nepal. He's an elected member in the House of Representatives. He is a foremost economist of South Asia. He formerly served as the vice chair of Nepal's National Planning Commission and also served as a member in 2 terms. And I think I would like to remember him, especially his service during the post-earthquake scenario in Nepal. They were very, very quick to develop the need assessment, called post-disaster need assessment, PDNA, and which attracted so many international donor agencies, and they've been pledges of billions of dollars for Nepal's reconstruction. As well as being an economist, he has also made significant contributions in the field of international development. So in that sense, we can call him developmental economist. He served as a senior economist at the World Bank and also policy analyst in UNDP, and also he served in many different places, including Vietnam, New York, and other places. He co-authored 2013's Global Human Development Report, which is very significant, I think, even today, as we have seen the the development that the South is attempting to rise. It was entitled "Rise of the South." Born in Bungkot, Gorkha, He went to Budanilakanta to do his school studies, and then came to UK to study economics at London School of Economics. Then he did his master's in international development and policy studies at Harvard, and PhD in economics from Australian National University. It is important to note that he led high-profile policy advisory mission to Sri Lanka when Sri Lanka was in crisis. So this makes, I think, all these qualifications and a significant role played in South Asia makes him one of the best choice to discuss about development and economy on that theme. He does have inside and outside knowledge about Nepal and beyond. So our request to Swarnim is to give this talk, research-based talk, as an academic and professional. So that's why I have not introduced him as a politician and his titles. I hope he understands those are limitations we have. So I would like to welcome Swarnim. So next 30 minutes or so is yours. I understand that you do not have slides, but you have got some notes which you would like to share when appropriate. Welcome to the forum, which is yours.
Thank you very much, Krishna ji, for that generous introduction. I assume everyone can hear me. Talking of Nepal's development, the current location where I am is actually a minor celebratory incident. I am here in remote Ramechhap, which adjoins Okhardunga and Solukhumbu, at a spot that apparently in 1953, when Tenzing Norgay and Edmund Hillary made their trip from Ziri in Dolakha to Everest Base Camp, they went through this route. So I happened to be here at that particular location. And here I am, 30 years ago or even 15 years ago, it would have been considered very remote. But now I'm connected to the world, speaking to you in the UK and elsewhere around the world, from a location right on the lap of the Himalayas, connected through internet. The district of Ramechhap, 100% electrified, major hydroelectricity projects, including the first private sector project in 2049 Vikram Sambat. After that, the law was introduced by Shailaja Acharya. Today, we have 3,600 megawatts of total installed capacity. More than 2/3 are from the private sector, but one of the early guinea pigs was right here in Khimti. So it's quite striking. So, while talking to you from this location, it contextualizes how far we've come in terms of development on an absolute comparison, but relatively speaking, we still lag behind, because other than Afghanistan, we remain the poorest country on the continent of Asia. So this is, I think, the big picture. I will structure my talk to you. I'm adept at now, political speeches, so I won't try to make it like a political speech, but at least in 3 parts: overview, this concept of democratic decay, or I will introduce something and I'll share some notes on the accountability trap. That's my sort of theorizing of where we stand in terms of the political malaise in Nepal, and the immediate reform roadmap. So we're at 3 o'clock. I'll take another 25-30 minutes, and then we can engage in Q&A. So when Nepal of today compares itself with Nepal of 30 years ago or even 35 years ago, many people use 1990 as that decisive threshold. People of our generation who saw the panchayat, partyless system topple and give way to the restoration of multi-party democracy. So many people compare, with the Maoists in the political mainstream now, people tend to take 2008 as another sort of threshold or milestone. But even if we go back 30 years, let's say 1995, and today we're at 2025. Comparing Nepal of today with Nepal of then is almost universal progress on every conceivable development metric. UNDP has the HDI, GDP per capita, life expectancy, school enrollment, social progress index, conservation cover, roads built, the electricity in generation, transmission, everything. Possibly some trade metrics and remittances are a new addition that have sort of distorted the economic landscape of Nepal. But on conventional development measures, if you like, there's the stock measures and flow measures. If you take the stock development measures that accumulate over time, like literacy, roads built, number of hospitals, number of graduates, etc., we've made tremendous progress, right? And it is in places like rural Ramechhap, where I am now. You have electricity, you have internet, you have running water, and a rough road that can bring in fresh supplies every day, right? So the most striking number, and I myself was taken aback when I heard this 3 weeks ago. There's a new World Bank country economic memorandum, and they argue that poverty in Nepal in 1995, so exactly 30 years ago, was 55%. When you use $2.15 per day, that has become almost zero. It's less than 0.5% now. So if you use the old metric, $2 15 days, it was 55% 30 years ago. Now it's less than 0.5%. We've eliminated extreme poverty, almost. Now, but if you use a more refined and upgraded poverty headcount ratio, which is currently at $6.85 per day, then poverty has fallen from 90% to do. So we're just $1,500 per capita per person. As an economy, we're $45 billion. And on a per capita basis, we lag behind Bangladesh, India, Vietnam, all that. So this dramatic reduction in extreme poverty by an older measure, though, was not fueled by GDP growth. It was not the expansion of the economic size or the dynamism inherent in there, the entrepreneurship, the investment climate. It was largely fueled by remittance inflows. So we know this story is well trodden, and many of us are familiar with it. So absolute comparison, Nepal has made progress when you compare itself with the Nepal of 1990, but relatively speaking, we've stagnated. And I did a little sort of back of the envelope exercise at the end of May when the budget was announced. So Bishnu Paudel, the current finance minister, announced a budget of 19 billion, roughly 19 kharab Nepali rupees, which is probably 15 to 16 US dollars billions. The economic size today is 45 billion US dollars. In Nepali rupees, it's 61 kharba. Had we sustained the pace of economic change in the early 90s, so about 30 years ago, without the Maoist conflict, without some of the international adversities, we could have, growing at 5, 6, 7% at a real rate, we would have become today a $100 billion economy. In Nepali rupees, it would have been 130 billion, 130 kharba Nepali economy. And 1/3 of that would have been about 40 kharba ko budget. So 40 kharba budget could have been announced a few months ago had the economic pie been bigger. So what happened? So we are at 60 kharba economic size. We could have been at 130. Where did that 70 kharba go? Where did it disappear? That I would like to call is the missing GDP that can partly be accounted by kusasana, bad governance in Nepal. I'm here borrowing a little bit from Amartya Sen, who used to document, the missing women, to draw attention to the gender disparities and the issues of infanticide in Asia, right? So this idea of a missing GDP, had governance taken shape, had we created an amenable investment environment, the economic pie would have been much higher, the public exchequer would have been much stronger, and even the budget size that is regularly announced every year would have been almost double the size that was announced here. So that's the economic sort of snapshot. There's massive uncertainty, anxiety, and restlessness among the youth of Nepal. And this has led to epic outmigration from districts like Ramechhap, where I am now. So Ramechhap, Okhornunga, Solukhumbu, it's like 30% decimation of their population. So it's almost depopulation of Nepali hills. In Nepali, I had to coin a new term when I gave public speeches. Nirjanikaran is the word that I used. It's massive. 35 of the 70 plus districts on a net negative sort of outflow. Half of Ramechhap is in Kathmandu or abroad, So while we've made progress on the absolute measure, it's this relative stagnation that is leading to a lot of uncertainty, anxiety, restlessness, as I said, epic outmigration in search of an aspirational society. And that aspirational society, people are looking now either in urban areas within Nepal or abroad, right? So this issue of almost at least 50 million Nepalis abroad, and the number varies. The census shows only 21 to 21 lakh, 2.1 million absentee population. But most of us agree that, it's about 50 lakh, 5 million Nepalis living abroad, including in the Gulf countries, and massive depopulation within Nepal, right? So this is a phenomenon. So what I'm trying to make the point is extreme poverty has almost been eliminated. When you compare Nepal of today with Nepal of 30 years ago, there's progress consistently across the board. Yet, relatively speaking, there's so much anxiety and uncertainty that this has led to a fundamental restructuring of our residential patterns, migration patterns, where young people are choosing to realize their dreams. So this is very, very important. Now, people have always moved, right? There's nothing new in migration. There's nothing new in war. There's nothing new in disease. There's nothing new in poverty. But there are new layers that are interacting with this uncertainty in life, right? So first is the pace of societal changes, the transformations, the nature and the structure of family. My mother, there were 7 sisters. On my father's side, there were 6 brothers. Folks who come from the Nepali Pahad, it's a familiar story. I have 1 son, and I promised no more kids, right? So this, the complete transformation shift to a nuclear family probably has transformed Nepal from suddenly we went from a 19th century modality of subsistence agriculture to a 21st century sort of urban nucleus. Nature of work is changing, as we know, and technology, I did not say at a time when Facebook has been banned in Nepal, and what social media is doing to the way we conduct ourselves in public life, social life, the way we work, the way we earn, the way we socialize. It's upending everything that we knew over the last 30 years. The second layer of anxiety on this economic pyramid is widespread polarization that is partly amplified by the first set of issues: changing nature of work, changing nature of family, and these transforming technologies. And the third are forces that seem to be beyond our grasp. So it could be geopolitics, what Trump is unleashing in the West, the rebalance of India and China, their rise, the resurgence, and he referred to the 2013 HDR that I co-authored at UNDP. And sitting in places like Ramechhap here, under the shadows of the mighty Himalayas, the planetary pressures, the climate change, we were in denial for a long time, but coming to places like this, extremely fragile and vulnerable, we see the first-hand impact of a changing climate. And all this is not sort of poetic utterance, right? I mean, you look at hard survey data. There, I would like to quote two. There's the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation. They found globally that 1 in 8 people currently suffer from mental health disorders and report levels of sadness and stress, which is 10 percentage points higher than a decade ago. So this is a global metric. You look at something that Pew and other global firms do on the World Values Survey, right? More than 30% of people think that most people can't be trusted. So what Émile Durkheim, this French sociologist, talked about by this word anomie, total breakdown, lack of trust in authority. We saw this partly during COVID as well. Lack of trust in authorities and expertise and institutions, etc. And these are some of the lowest recorded values when it comes to trust. So this, I think, so what we now understand is people like us, economists, give all this wonderful evidence that things have improved. Why don't you appreciate it? Things have really become great over the last 30 years. But now, increasingly, I am also resigning to the fact that it's not just evidence alone that is needed to change people's minds. We must widen our understanding of human behavior to recognize the role of emotions, cognitive bias, and culture in how we interpret evidence that might otherwise be quantitatively sort of supported. So this is sort of the big frame I would like to introduce at first. Now, diving a little bit into Nepal, people have interpreted Nepali history differently. I was with Baburam Bhattarai the other day at an event, and somebody criticized, questioned the justification of their armed struggle, and he was again trying to split the Nepali history into 3 periods, blah blah blah. The first being territorial consolidation, the second was an unfinished agenda, and the third is agenda of state formation, and the third is economic prosperity. I actually also did something similar 5 years ago at a talk that I had given at Brown University. So I also split Nepal's 250 years. So since, if you take 1769 as that date when Prithvinarayan Shah, the king of that petty kingdom called Gorkha, marched into Kathmandu Valley, and began that process of territorial annexation, you could say from 1769 to 1846, before Jangabahadur, it was all, expanding east, expanding west. There was a slight interruption in 1816 with the Sugauli Treaty. And then after Jangabahadur in 1846, it continues until 1950, the system of hereditary prime ministers. Not much on economic front, not much on political reform. It's largely territorial consolidation. And the economic model there was agrarian feudal. You extract surplus from peasants, and the rulers lived off handsomely, but the rest of the population were really, stuck in the subsistence mode. Life expectancy was less than 30. Economic indicators, if you look at even Angus Madison's historical data, some extrapolation there, it's very, very low, right? It was $60 or something like that. The struggle for a modern catch-up began in 1951 to 1960 with Sat Sal Ko Kranti, 1961 to 1968 with King Mahendra's early days of Panchayat, 68 to 90 under King Birendra, and then obviously a full-blown experimentation with democracy and inclusive development under constitutional governance after 1990. So you can again bifurcate that into 1990 to 2006 and the period after 2007 until the new constitution, etc. But there was one interruption in 1934. So there's a clean sort of segregation, except 1934, after the great earthquake, 90 saal ko bhukampa, the first baby steps towards modernization were taken in the aftermath of the 90 saal ko bhukampa. I remember November 1935, Nepal formed, Jangabahadur, Juddha Samser formed the industrial board. 28 factories were set up in one stroke. And Nepal's first Company Act and Nepal's first Banking Act were introduced at that time, right? So that period is worth noting. Otherwise, right until 1769 to 1950, It's just a feudal setup, agrarian setup, subsistence mode. The rulers lived off the surplus. No tangible effort at modernization, except that Big Bang intervention in the aftermath of the great earthquake of 1934. And so you can again characterize this differently. So we've faced three challenges over this period, over the last 250 years. One of exclusion within Nepal, the vastly differentiated society in terms of caste, in terms of gender, in terms of ethnicity, which the latest Samvidhan tried to redress. The second issue has always been a quest to guard our Tsar Killa, the existential quest to guard ourselves against too powerful neighbors, too powerful empires. So preserving our sovereignty has indeed been a consistent theme in our nationhood. And if one were to give one, conservative credit to the Ranas, they handled this relatively well. But the third theme that runs through our history is one of extraction. So economic extraction, stagnation, lulled often by external flows, and our policy-locked mentality to accentuate this landlocked position, right? So 3 E's essentially. The last 250 years neatly summarized into exclusion, existence, and extraction. So that's where we have come from. The current malaise I handled at the beginning, and this paradox between making absolute progress, yet on a relative comparison, there's a lot of anxiety and uncertainty. So I've often posed this in public settings that if things continue as usual, on a business as usual mode, there are 3 profound consequences. Nepal will likely become old without ever becoming rich. Nepal will have become a heavily urbanized society without ever having been meaningfully industrialized or acquired character of an industrial society. Yet you make that leap into a society that is heavily urban. Already it's at 2/3, counting the Nagar Palikas, even though they don't have all the amenities. But aspirationally, we're there. Soon 80% of Nepali population will live in urban or semi-urban areas. And the third phenomenon, if things continue as usual, is we will be amazingly connected with the globe. We are globally connected. I am speaking to you, again, just to repeat the point, from remote Ramechhap, and here I am connected to the rest of the world. Anybody from Santiago, Chile, to Seattle, America, to Bergen in Norway, to Perth in Australia can talk to me right now. So we're globally connected, instantly connected. But economically, we remain on the margins, peripheral. So old without ever becoming rich, given our demographic projections, will become an aging society by 2028, an aged society by 2052, given our fertility rate, morbidity rate, etc. Yet per capita income-wise, we're still at 1,500, the poorest on the continent of Asia. Even if we make a miraculous catch-up over the next 10 years, and let's say triple in current dollar terms, we're only at 4,000, 4,500, which is what today's Sri Lanka is, or today's Vietnam is, less than that. Even if we pull off a miracle at a pace that we've never seen before. So this is the context in which we're in when I talk about development laggardness and our lagging development. So who should be blamed for this? Now, it's very easy to say, oh, it's the politicians, obviously. They are corrupt, they are inept, and the kind of regime that they have turned, what was on paper supposed to be liberal democracy, they've turned it into an illiberal democracy, in the words of Farid Zakaria, and I can explain later along what dimensions. But I would argue that we should go one step further, and they've turned this illiberal democracy into a kleptocracy. And this is a result of a few things, or this has led to a few very striking political, economic characteristics. So there's economic stagnation. Overall, poverty has come down largely because of external flows, but not inherent economic dynamism and GDP growth. I talked about the concept of missing GDP earlier. So there's economic stagnation, but the political machinery has become very, very expensive. So in a district like Ramechhap, I ran into the member, Kansa Tamang, who is a contractor from the Nepali Congress. It is rumored that he spent up to 10 crores to win this election here in this sparsely populated district of Ramechhap. 10 crores Nepali rupees. Right? So this is become unusual. And the party bosses, the way the internal democracy is scuttled, to get hold of the delegates, to elect them during general conventions, and therefore become bosses of their respective parties for 5 years, and then exercise influence in government. This whole winner takes all. If you win, you control everything. Our institutions don't force a compromise. So this economic stagnation and costly party politics, where there is high stakes associated with winning and losing. If you lose everything. If you win, you win the world. So high stakes in political fortunes is a result, both a cause and a consequence of this kleptocracy that we're seeing right now. Now, what has this done? So they come to power, rather than initiate reforms, sustain reforms, trigger growth, expand the economic pie, their interest is extraction. And once you extract, you are liable to prosecution. You may go to jail. So to prevent yourself or the entire political class from going to jail, you engage in elite capture of institutions to foster impunity, right? So all public appointments in crucial institutions are now for sale or policy co-option. You basically plant people who pay you bribes, you place them in significant positions, including heads of constitutional bodies. Or if they don't offer you bribe, they expect intense loyalty proven over decades to party fealty, etc. Right? So this is leading to a kleptocratic illiberal democracy where you have periodic elections on the one hand. So you can say, chunav ta bhairakheko cha ni, 4-4 varsha, 5-5 varsha. Periodic elections are there. But that other branch of a liberal democracy, which is a set of 3 things, often called constitutional liberalism: rule of law, separation of powers, and fundamental rights. That's gone. There's no rule of law in Nepal. There's no separation of powers now, with the judiciary firmly under the partisan sort of control through Samvidhanik Parishad, where the big bosses live, etc. So this inept and corrupt political class is giving rise to a kleptocracy, arose because of economic stagnation and costly party politics, absence of internal democracies within parties, leading to elite capture of institutions and impunity, and a kleptocratic illiberal democracy. So this has become very much a reality. Now the private sector, which we would have expected to create wealth, to create jobs, to strengthen the size of the exchequer, would rather collude with the corrupt politicians than innovate, than seek new markets, than really be good at what they do, which is create jobs and create wealth, right? So the proximity and the financing of politicians, you'd rather acquire licenses and seek favors through patronage, and you erect barriers to new entrants because they will destabilize the status quo. So this is leading to a very stagnant economy, low opportunity cost of engaging in public office, etc. And the third part is also the bureaucracy, which is, as always, very conservative, can be stifling, can be hostile to the private sector, and often a very cynical, low-trust society where everything is tokie bomozing, and with so much discretion enshrined in this non-functional bureaucracy, we're in this corrupt nexus: politics, rent-seeking private sector, and a stifling non-functional bureaucracy, which is leading to this current unease, the malaise, and the stagnation. So I know I'm running out of time. Before I end with the reform topic, let me show you something. I'm trying to theorize all this. in what I call an accountability trap, right? So I'll share my screen. So I hope you can see this. Oh, sorry.
Yes. Yes, coming up. Yeah.
Maybe. So this you can see, right? Okay. So this, I would like to run through this, which I want to call, so this current malaise, what's going on? So if I were a political science professor or an economist at LSE or Oxford or Harvard or wherever, so this is, I'm trying to sort of theorize this, right? So let me blow this up a little bit. Okay. And I discussed this with Professor Abhidit Acharya at Stanford, who is a tenured political science professor. So we're trying to develop this. So what we see in Nepal is possibly an accountability trap. So this is a situation where voters expect all politicians to be corrupt, untrustworthy, low-skilled, and therefore they lose interest and are cynical about change that can occur through politics, right? So high-skilled individuals, many of you in the room today, many of you who've joined Zoom, you've left the country. So high-skilled individuals who would rather consider a career in politics are completely turned off, right? So when this happens, sorry. So when this happens, the pessimistic expectations of voters become self-fulfilling. So this is a notion of self-fulfilling process. झोर हुन्छ भन्यो, अब झोर भइ नै हाल्छ, अनि यी मैले त भनेकै थिएँ नि भन्ने भएन. So the pessimistic expectations of voters become self-fulfilling. So politics becomes trapped in a low accountability equilibrium. Now, its alternative ke hoga? The alternative to the low accountability equilibrium is a high accountability equilibrium in which voters expect both good and bad candidates to enter politics. So राम्रो पनि आउँछ, नराम्रो पनि आउँछ, and believe that it is possible to tell the bad types of politicians from the good types by watching their behavior. Hence, voters pay close attention to politics. They monitor their politicians, attend meetings, and rally support for good candidates and vote the bums out of office. So when this happens in another high accountability situation, both good and bad types of individuals enter politics, but proportionally more good types enter because the bad types know they won't survive long in office. Again, the expectations of voters becomes self-fulfilling, making this also an equilibrium in the economic sense. So how does society move from the low accountability equilibrium to the high accountability equilibrium? That is, how does society escape अहिलेको जस्तो कुशासन? So in a country like Nepal, the low accountability equilibrium is further stabilized by the fact that extant politicians, अहिलेको existing politicians, have erected significant barriers to entry into politics. And you've seen this with the ferocity of attacks on new political forces that are trying to break in. Even with multi-party democracy, the labor market for politicians is run by a cartel of political parties that collude to prevent entry into politics by aspiring good type politicians who seek to disrupt the market by enhancing competition. So I'm using a lot of economics language to theorize this. Now, these barriers enable them to engage in the kind of rent-seeking, clientelist, patronage politics that generates income for them and their cronies at the expense of the state and of citizens. One could say that their collusive behavior enables them to eat into the voter surplus. Now, breaking the low accountability trap requires first removing down the barriers to entry. So institutional reforms within parties. So party भित्रैबाट पनि राम्रा मान्छेहरू आउनु पर्यो, such as the implementation of a primary system or direct election to top party positions. But as William Riker explained many decades ago, this kind of institutional reform cannot take place if those who benefit from the current system expect to come out on the losing end, etc. So for this kind of institutional change to happen, we need citizens to organize, to unite and demand these changes. Most citizens are busy going about their everyday lives. It is at rare moments that they have come together. In Nepal, Nabbe Saal, the various movements, and obviously the Jana Andolan movements, earthquake, etc. Now, strong charismatic leaders come often, and they can play an important role in leading this organization, the unity and the demands for political change. So let me conclude by showing this graph. So here's the sort of a typical demand supply kind of a graph. Again, a model that captures a complex reality. So if the voter attention and engagement is very low, you are at a low accountability equilibrium, right? But if voter attention and engagement and entrance crosses a certain tipping point, then you can move from a low accountability equilibrium to a high accountability equilibrium, where political reward to good candidates goes up with the increase in intensity and engagement, and political reward to bad candidates is on a downward slope as engagement increases. But before you reach that tipping point, the incentive structure is completely flipped, right? When voter engagement and the high-skilled individuals, the more alert individuals, the globally connected individuals are completely turned off the political system, then political reward to bad candidates is high. So you buy your ticket, you spend your way through victory, and you engage in crony capitalism to sustain and entrench your position, right? So this is the low. So we're probably on the left side of the tipping point right now. But theoretically, if we were to enhance that engagement and move towards the right, we would flip the incentive structure so that Nepal can move from a low accountability to a high accountability. Again, very, very like all models, it's trying to reduce to a bare minimum, a very simple story of where we are now and where we ought to go and what needs to happen, right? So this, just because this is an academic audience, I wanted to share that even if I go around the country doing political bhashans these days, it's often theory at the back of my mind on how do you theorize this. If you were to acquire the numbers and the strength eventually, where would you start? Where would your reform processes begin, right? So that's the kind of story that I wanted to share. Now, finally, let me end with a few areas where we might do exactly that, which is, let me just open up my. So where do we start? So the agenda for reform, and I'll conclude this in 4 minutes. So on the economic sphere, right now, it's a story of economic stagnation. Everything is cartel and syndicates, and then even the private sector is in collusion with the political class to erect barriers, etc. So we need a level playing field that is pro-competition. So in Europe, you hear often about these competition policies that, in the interest of the average consumer, even monopolies are broken down, competition is ensured, this big bullying, we hear about the antitrust jars fighting against Google and Microsoft and even Tesla and others, especially the American innovators. The idea is you need a pro-competitive level playing field. Anybody with a good idea, anybody with a good drive, risk-taking appetite should come in and engage in the economic sphere to expand the economic pie. And in Nepal's case, I see there are 5 major drivers of economic growth. Number one, given our landlocked status and the evolving technologies, digitalization, great hope there. And I have concrete numbers based on a survey that IIDS did 2 years ago, after which a lot of policy burst of reforms is happening. Clean energy, self-evident. Clean energy associated with green manufacturing along the border that is part of the international production network, at least the regional production network, that uses our cheap labor and clean energy to displace dirty sources of fuel, the production sharing model, etc. Part of it can be export-oriented, but a lot of that can be, in the light of the resurgence of industrial policy, can also be to substitute a lot of the cheap imports that are flooding Nepali market. Fourth, high-value agriculture. At a place like rural Ramechhap, where I am now, amazing potentials on dairy, on herbal products, etc. The industrialists like Pawan Golyan have there documented around 25 items, very high value, low volume kind of items, which can be grown and cultivated on a commercial scale between 500 meters and 1500 meters. And it struck me that one of them is a plant called Argeli Matsumata, a plant that is used to produce Japanese currency notes from eastern part of Nepal, right? So amazing potentials there, but we need to open up the legislative structure. The FDI has to come in. FDI has to bring in a ready-made market, technology, and that model of partnership. So on the economic sphere, it's really about scrapping 30, 40, 50 laws that are putting a stranglehold on our dynamism right now, and really latching on to the 5 drivers of growth. I think I mentioned, I forgot to mention tourism and landscape marketing, even longer term stay. Right now, the model is abysmal. 1 million tourists, $48 a day, 13 days average stay. If you convert that into 3 million tourists, $100 per tourist, and 17 days average stay, by doing whatever it takes, you increase the foreign exchange earnings by tenfold, right? So that's the economic sphere. On the social sphere, the catchword here is social mobility, right? Are you more educated than your parents' generation? Are you pursuing occupations different than your own parents' occupations and vocations? Exceptionally important in a country that was caste-ridden, saw gender strife, even regional disparities, right? And you address inequality of opportunities through quality education, quality health, nutrition, and social protection. So that's the social agenda. So Shiksha Mantralaya, Swasthya Mantralaya, Samajik Suraksha Mantralaya, all that stuff is that second basket. Third, and this is probably a necessary but not a sufficient condition, how do you revert that illiberal democracy back to liberal democracy? How do you, this representative, inclusive institutions with safeguards against elite capture, right? Now, if you look at the global history, even in the UK, where many of you are based, periodic elections became a thing only after 1928. It's not even been 100 years yet. And at that time, there was a time in 1867 when only 1 in 7 urban males could vote. So you have to be urban, you have to be male, and only 1 in 7 urban males could vote. Later on, they said anybody who earns more than 10 sterling pounds can vote, right? But even when the universal franchise was restricted, the UK already had a rule of law. By the 1840s, they had separation of powers, and basic liberties were guaranteed, right? So this classic distinction between liberal and illiberal democracy, which we are seeing pan out in the context of Nepal, even maturing into kleptocracy, as I've argued earlier, has to be redressed. So this democratic decay that I mentioned in the title has to be corrected. Now, this ultimately involves changing the perverse incentive structure, how the constitutional bodies appoint people to Nyayalaya, to Akhtiyar, to Nirbachan Ayog. We need more rules and less discretion to circumscribe the Tasbizi Adhikar of politicians. We need to reward performers and lower impunity. We need to instill term limits, maybe even de-link legislative MP functions from cabinet roles. So do we even go to a directly elected executive kind of a system? Because as long as you have MPs becoming ministers, this chronic, vicious cycle of cronyism will persist. Second is to widen the franchise. All Nepalis who are living abroad, they need to be given voting rights. So we widen the franchise and we limit the number of professional politicians. And the third is, of course, limiting the role of big and untransparent money in politics. So public financing of national parties, this has become much more important now. Rameswar Khanal's recent economic report that he's submitted to the government actually talks about almost giving 100 rupee per vote to political parties and then making them audited by the Auditor General so that you limit the role of big money. It's not so much a big issue in Europe, but in the US, this has been a big issue and it remains a big issue in South Asian politics. And you need bottom-up candidate selection to reduce the discretionary authority that these party bosses, the party feudals have, right? So finally, the hope for me in Nepal, given all these challenges, is in demography. The young folk over the next 8 to 10 years, and then it will taper off. They are the agent of change, and there's immense hope on how we engage the diaspora. I've concluded in my recent visits to Canada and the UK that it's not the diaspora needing Nepal, but Nepal needs the diaspora much more now. And this is where the citizenship issues, etc., come in. The democracy, we need a cleaned up system. There's no other better modality to aggregate the diverse preferences of a country as heterogeneous as Nepal. And the third D is distance, which is about density and digitalization, location, etc. This is really playing to the theme, playing to the fact that we are within 4 hours of flying distance from half the world's GDP and half the world's population. And we need to strategize on how we take advantage of that. So let me end here and happy to take questions.
Thank you. This is really a big theme and lot of ideas. I mean, it actually covers not only the economy, it deals about the culture of governance, and so on, and how can Nepal, make more progress in terms of development. Thank you for this. In terms of time, I think we started slightly late due to the technical issues we're facing beyond our control. So I propose that rather than simply trying to finish it at 10:15 UK time, and for Nepal, I think we'll extend by 15 minutes or so. So I hope you will be able to stay put. I think let me just start from the point raised by Boji. I also do have some questions. So I also encourage other participants, please, to type your comments or questions here. So we'll try to take them. So Boji, he served in the British military. Then he went into teaching up to O and A levels in the UK and planning, program planning and management in banking, money laundering, and he worked as a consultant in the Swiss Bank and many other banks. He was the Chief Information Security Officer, so he does bring a lot of knowledge and ideas about the finance, and also being a Nepali living abroad, has also a lot of concern about the diaspora. So he is asking that I don't know whether you will be able to see his question directly, but he's asking that they ask you as a potential finance minister, should RSP form a government, should you be one, what are your practical, workable, not theoretical solutions to eradicate poor governance, carteling, collusion, unfair competitions, monopolies, conflict of interest? I think you try to address those towards the end. And linked to this one, I think I also like to ask a question about the model you presented about the accountability trap. I'm especially interested about the point about the voters' attention engagement, which requires behavioral change. So what could be the ways of influencing voters' attention and the behavior change? Let's start from these questions.
Okay, thank you. On what would I do? So we have been speaking on these themes for a while. So what we've realized is, 19 seats in parliament right now, nothing we do will even move a needle, right? We can be popular among the masses. We can be, we can increase our social media followership, etc. But tangibly, it's all arithmetic at the end of the day in a Westminster-style democracy. So the day we attain Bahumat, which is 138 seats, either ourselves or through like-minded allies, which we see as an increasing possibility in the November 2027 elections, 50% strength is enough to scrap bad laws. So there's a list of 28 to 42 laws economic laws, FDI, technology transfer, stock exchange, all this. There's a whole compendium. And if you go to Nepal Law Commission website, we get a whole list of these on trade, on FDI, on commerce, on economic regulation, on the Rashtra Bank, etc. So it's almost been a consensus among the private sector, CNI, FNCCI, etc., that at least 24 bad laws need to be scrapped or revised substantially. So the Foreign Currency Restriction Act goes back 65 years, right? This ban to invest abroad goes back 50, 60 years. None of these have been changed. So one big bang reform that we need to do, a strong government that is economically literate, unlike the ones that we've been having over the last few years, is to do exactly that. So do that big bang economic reform, 24 laws in one go, seems like a tough task, but there's a way to do it. Kehi Nepal ऐन संशोधन गर्न विधेयक बनेको विधेयक. There's a modus operandi. You put together that omnibus thing in one go and you can do it only if you have 50% and if you have a fresh mandate. In Nepal, a lot of the newly elected government squander that mandate because for the first 6 months, they do almost nothing. And here, I'm often referring to the UK example in the 90s. When I was a student at the LSE in 93, I saw how Gordon Brown and Tony Blair were preparing for their eventual takeover of an inevitable Labour government in 97, right? For 4 years, they were preparing. They were just doing that. What would I do in the first 24 hours? What would I do in the first week? And that's what led to the total independence of the Bank of England within the first day, the total reform of the House of Lords, etc. So something inspirational like that, conditional on us gaining the numbers. Ultimately, it's the numbers. But if you have the numbers, are you prepared to do that, right? So that economic idea, that economic reform is there. Now, suppose we get 2/3, not just RSP, but like-minded folks. There's a whole new coalition coming into the picture, new landscape, political landscape, the diasporic infusion, the young demography, miracles have happened before. If it's 2/3, then it's about changing the incentive structures of the current constitution itself. So in Nepali, we have a stratified strategy, Samvidhan Samsodhan, Samvidhan Parimarjan, and Samvidhan Punarlekhan. So depending on the hierarchy, we'll go all the way. But the 50% majority and work on revamping antiquated laws that will be pro-investment, pro-private sector friendly, pro-digitalization, pro-engagement. It sounds theoretical, but I can list the actual acts that we intend to reform at another setting. I can send you that list privately as well, right? And a lot of homework has been done, and there's a fair amount of consensus on these issues, which we have owned. And, before I joined RSP, I played a big role in drafting the Nepali Congress manifesto. And there too, we've listed all this. But unfortunately, these manifestos in other parties have tended to become very formalistic. Nobody reads them, nobody owns them, nobody implements them. But we tend to do it differently. And again, here, because this is primarily a UK audience, I want to say that another good thing that I learned in the UK was you just don't declare intentions in manifestos. You cost them. What are you going to do? How much it is going to cost? And where do you get the money from? Where do you get the resources from? So that's the mode we're in. We have at least 6 or 7 economic related vivags in our party, and we're really working on this agenda. And it's not that we want to reinvent the wheel, right? We want to start from scratch. There's a lot of stuff that's already on the shelves. We'll own them. We'll take them, all the bright reform ideas. And the last one that I mentioned was the Rameswar Khanal report that the current finance minister commissioned. Brilliant report, tons of sensible economic reform ideas. And not much has been done because the real intention was not.
I think it's his internet.
voter engagement. So this is, again, I mentioned the phrase widening the franchise, right? So widening the franchise. So how the current complacency in Nepali politics is, unfortunately, because of the large and epic outmigration of young Nepalis. Imagine 5 million Nepalis inside Nepal right now, with Facebook being shut down. Do you think the streets would have been quiet? With 5 million young Nepalis suddenly cut off from the world engagement? No way. So these 5 million Nepali youths or professionals have left the country, the ones who really care about good governance, etc. And in return, they are sending money directly to the households so that the government doesn't need to do anything. So this culture of complacency, this sustaining bad actors and sustaining an economy because of these direct transfers has been this supreme paradox of our political economy. So we need to widen the franchise. If people voted these bumps out, I think that would be the key. How do we issue, as the Supreme Court has already ordered the Election Commission to ensure that people who still hold Nepali citizenship to really get that right. The current regime won't do it because they know the votes will be against them. But this is something we need to work on. The second is the existing voters within Nepal or migrant workers in India, tempt them into Nepal to vote, at least to make this change, convince them that it's the only way, because we're not resorting to violence. We're not doing yet another redundant revolution. We have to work through the system. It has to be Janamat Sangrah, Dhara 275. It has to be Samvidhan Samshodhan, Dhara 274 of the current system to reform it from within, right? And here it's really getting the numbers out. And it's not that hard. Let me leave you with a striking number again. Eligible Nepali voters, 180 lakhs. Total votes cast in the last election, 110 lakhs. 5 lakhs votes, void. How much votes out of 180 lakhs did the most dominant, the largest party in Nepal get out of that 180 lakh voter pool? Only 27 lakhs.
Right. Sorry. Let me also try to steer it a little bit. That was the question originally asked by Bojrajji. He also wanted to know more about the Nepalis living abroad, and unless the dual citizenship granted, achieving those things would be hard. I think you have addressed this. We have a question about linked to this migration and the progress Nepal made. The first question was asked by Padam Simkhada about the poverty reduced in Nepal, in a dramatic scale. But this was not driven by domestic job creation rather than the remittances. So Nepal's poverty reduction story is globally remarkable, but it has been achieved without significant domestic job creation. What policy reforms do you think are most urgent to ensure that Nepal's next phase of growth translates into quality employment? I think linked to this one, also a question by Naresh Khapangiji. Considering that poor governance remains a significant ongoing issue in Nepal, what is likelihood of the country considering to suffer a substantial loss in its potential GDP in the foreseeable future? I think to this, I would like to link a little bit about your experience of leading a mission to Sri Lanka. Given that Nepal is really hugely debt dependent now, debt aid ratio has flipped, and we are borrowing a lot. Is there any crisis in the making? Also, what's the hope there?
Okay. So the dual citizenship, etc. I've been very clear on this. If you hold Nepali citizenship, regardless of your PR status, you are a Nepali citizen. We don't care whether you have green card, PR, etc. You are eligible to vote in Nepal. You are as good as a Nepali citizen. It's just that you've taken a long-term visa and chosen to locate yourself elsewhere for a time being, right? Even if you have relinquished your Nepali citizenship, other than a few sensitive positions, you should be treated equally as a Nepali citizens when it comes to the economic, cultural, and social rights. So this was the spirit of the constitution, but I'm led to believe that this has been substantially circumscribed. We will reverse this and resort to the original spirit of the constitution. So this widening the franchise theme is sort of consistent with that. Absolutely, that was my point. So we practically eliminated extreme poverty when measured by $2.15 a day. That's the World Bank study over the last 30 years, from 55% to less than 0.5%. Yet if you use a higher metric, which is more realistic, $6.85, we're still at around 50%. So that's a middle class kind of poverty. And a lot of that was driven by remittances and not so much the internal dynamism. So that's the conclusion of the policy experts, including international organizations. What would we do differently is zero in on the 5 drivers of economic growth that we see as the long-term potential dynamo for Nepal. So clean energy, digitalization, tourism, high-value agriculture, and green resurgence of manufacturing, right? So this is part of the international production network. So these 5 issues are all job creating in nature, even though we admit that the nature of job creation is evolving dramatically. The old model of manufacturing is no longer as job creating as before, but there are aspects within the services industry now that have begun to acquire characteristics that used to be associated with manufacturing in the 20th century. So here it's a bit theoretical, but these are areas where basically we shouldn't do idhar ka udhar ka idhar, which is policy arbitrage vis-a-vis India. That has really been our 70 years of industrial policy. That model is not sustainable. One minor tweak on the other side beyond our control and everything collapses. That's what we've seen. So we need to rely on 5 durable dynamos to power the Nepali economy. And this is where we will look for jobs and to expand the economy. Sri Lanka, Forex, etc. So this was a point I made in 2022 also after coming back from Sri Lanka, that our problems are actually slightly different. So the Sri Lankan crisis was one of foreign exchange depletion. They literally had less than $10 million in the bank, which could not afford to procure medicines, fuel, essential supplies. Nepal's is an embarrassment of riches. We have $18 billion of hard dollars stacked in the Rashtra Bank right now, right? So Sri Lanka couldn't support imports for even 2 days. In Nepal, we can support our imports, or we can finance the current pattern of imports for the next 18 months at current rates. So it's a different problem. Ours is internal mess, lack of incentives for wealth creation, stagnation, joblessness, etc. Sri Lanka's was purely an external sort of problem. But the debt story is important to note. So Sri Lanka had borrowed heavily from private actors, private creditors, including from Wall Street, and it had borrowed heavily from bilateral donors like China, Japan, and India, and of course the traditional multilateral banks, the World Bank, ADB, etc. It was the private creditors, once they lost faith in the way economic policy was conducted, random tax cuts, clientelism, patronage networks under the Rajapaksas, a lot of that. So they wanted their money back. And because of COVID was about to come in, but they had the Easter Day bombing, a lot of stagnation had already crept in. They couldn't service their debts, and that led to panic, and they said they defaulted, right? Nepal, sometimes there's an advantage in backwardness. Nobody trusts us. We don't borrow from private market. It's only highly concessional money from the World Bank and the ADB is our debt. So our debt stock is exceptionally concessional in nature, which we can ask them to restructure, refinance, reschedule if and when necessary. But the current stock of around 43% debt to GDP ratio is not alarming by any means. The low income average is around 48-50%. If your economy is growing, so your numerator to denominator, if the denominator is growing, the ratio is diminishing anyway. So the trick to curing indebtedness is not to take less loans, but to expand GDP. So numerator grows at a slower rate than the denominator, and the ratio actually falls, right? Is that happening in Nepal? Not quite. The kind of borrowing that we did over the last 10 years, it was only 25% during the earthquake, 2015, and now it's 43%, almost doubled. And where did all that excessive borrowing go? It went into non-growth creating sectors, transfers, earthquake rehabilitation of houses that you really didn't need, etc. But if the borrowing is channeled to growth creating areas, high productive infrastructure, expanding capabilities, etc., a lot of the borrowing pay for themselves. And that's the idea that we need to foster.
Thank you. Since you talked about India also came in, when you're discussing this question, and also we talk about Sri Lanka. Let's bring a couple of questions by Bhagirath Yogi and somebody using Samsung phone, I think from Gulmi, I understand. They're asking, Bhagirath ji is asking, let me go to question that you had also emphasized on the issue of accountability during your recent visit to Canada. My question is, in the changing geopolitics, how could Nepal become a bridge between our two giant neighbors and gain from their rapid economic development while protecting her sovereignty and independence? And linked to that one, I think there is a question about your meeting with Narendra Modi in 2022. You had a 7-minute meeting. So what transpired there? How he conveyed his perspective in Nepal and how he views the country at present. So maybe you can combine these two together to answer this question. Thank you.
Bhagirath ji is ever the BBC journalist, right? So, so his question is on what transpires in these backroom meetings and all. It was, it was a very nice meeting that I had with Prime Minister Modi. What I told him was basically, Your Excellency, you came to Nepal in 2014. You melted away a lot of distrust that we had, and you even said, and he actually said this, "Main Nepal ko hit kar dunga." That's what he said in Parliament, and we're like, what is he saying? Nepal ko hit kar dunga. So he meant HIT, hit, highways, infoways, and transways. Turns out quite prescient, quite important. Highways, road-to-road connectivity, you reduce distance, you reduce the cost of doing trade, transit, etc. Increase people-to-people mobility, great economic focus. Infoways, we're in the digital economy. Let's integrate ourselves digitally. Cross-border payments, digital gateways, offshoring, partnerships along a whole swath of the digital arena, and the backbone has to be digital connectivity. So that's infoways, that's what it termed. And transways, which is for transmission lines. Evacuate all our surplus clean energy to displace dirty sources of fuel in India in an era of climate change. Nepal gets a hoping windfall in revenue, and it helps. It's a win-win for everyone. So Nepal ko hit kar dunga and all that. So anyway, so I thought, as I reflected more deeply on this, I thought, okay, this can be a workable agenda, minimum agenda. And I reminded him that, but not much has happened, Your Excellency. So, you laid out a grand vision in 2014. This was 2022 or 23. I said, not much has happened to honor the spirit in which you uttered those grand intentions for our two neighboring countries. And it was a very positive, very constructive kind of a discussion. So on that, I think with India and China, obviously, it's very rare, right? I mean, in yesterday or 2 days ago, I was giving party orientation to my colleagues. And I said, how do we frame even the fact that China is to our north and India is to our south? In Nepali, I use the phrase, it's a Durlabh Yugin Avasar, right? Durlabh Yugin Avasar. And that's, I think, is really what it is. How many other countries share China and India as neighbors? There's Myanmar, which is problematic. Bhutan, not really a functional relationship to the north. And Pakistan, which is not even worth discussing. So it's Nepal, right, to the Chinese side. But what we don't understand, and this is where the Nepali public discourse is often stilted, is, oh, Chin Mati sa, Bharat tala sa. It's not that way, right? If you look at the density, there are 3 Ds we need to look at: density, distance, and division. So in terms of density, half of China, 50% of China that adjoins Nepal is home to only 6% of the Chinese population. The other 94% is really far. Even if you fly from Kathmandu, it's going to take 4 hours. The nearest city is Chongqing, which is 3.5 hours away. Shanghai, Beijing, Tianjin, the whole eastern seaboard is really far. On the south, you fly for half an hour and you reach a market of 700 million people, right? Half of India lives on the 1/3 of the Indian territory that adjoins Nepal. So this statistics then says, okay, so do we then just align with India? No way. We need Chinese capital. We need Chinese markets. We need Chinese ingenuity. It just implies that the mode of connectivity has to be different. So with China, it has to be air connectivity ramped up massively. There are 20 cities in China with more than 10 million people. So Nepal is 30 million, but 10 million plus cities in China there are. So there are 20 countries within China. Why not direct air connectivity? There are 200 cities in China with more than 1 million people. So these hubs within China. And how many daily flights we have with China these days? 5 or 6. So on India, it's more multimodal. There could be water connectivity, energy connectivity, rail, partly, road, obviously, energy, digital, etc. So this fashioning of modes of connectivity and engagement has to be more creative. And for what? To attract tourists, middle-class tourists, to attract investment. And we know from economics literature that contiguous investments, if you share a border, you tend to invest more, controlling for everything else. Concessional financing of infrastructure, with the World Bank and ADB now drying up gradually, we need to look up these new sources of finance, and this has to come from these emerging giants, and export markets for our products, right? So this is where how we engage. What do we give up in return? Nothing, not an inch of sovereignty, not an inch of our national pride. And it's a pity that, things often get misinterpreted, etc. But all rising powers, together with their strengths, also have a degree of vulnerabilities. And we as good neighbors, we as global citizens need to be respectful of the vulnerabilities of these rising powers. So in China's case, it's the issue of Tibet, it's the issue of Taiwan, it's the issue of their perception that they are partly encircled by hostile Western powers. What is it on the Indian side? It's the open border. Will it be abused by states not friendly to them? We need to ensure that these basic red lines of our neighboring countries are respected. Then after that, it's all a win-win agenda of development partnership, because Nepal's only interest is to seek sovereign reciprocity in an otherwise asymmetric relationship. This is our challenge. Sovereign reciprocity in a structurally asymmetric relationship, right? And for that you need statesmanship. That crafting of foreign and economic policy has to be done in a way that does not hurt our sensibilities. Thank you.
Right, thank you. I'm also considering the time we have. I really would like to finish this Q&A in the next 5 minutes so that we really don't overrun and frustrate our participants. So I'm going to take all the questions, which can be grouped into 2 or 3 themes, and then you can briefly respond them. Gokana GC from the United States highlighted that there are 2 problems we're facing. One being corruption. I think we already dealt about it. Second is brain drain, which also somehow came, but also can be, responded, more. Linked to this one is Susma Basnet's point about youth migration is really weakening Nepal's development capacity. So this, brain drain, youth migration, there was partly we discussed is a one point here, and sorry, I've got right. Gorakh, I think there's a kind of Gorakh Giri is asking about are there any plans as an economist to promote science and technology-based resources mobilization in the context of Nepal, where everyone is collecting herbs from all nooks and corners of hills and tarai towards exporting it on processed form with very less benefit? So I think it's about job creation, resource generation. I think there is a similar question here. I think somewhere, how will RSP create jobs at the provincial and local levels in Nepal? And can the country even overcome the geographical hamstrings for industrial and trade expansion? I think we partly addressed this job creation thing. So in the interest of time, we can skip that. And there are questions from Prakash Basnet, who is asking every part presents, okay, in terms of policies, every party presents really good policies to hear. On the paper, however, the issue have been implementing those policies. How do you think policies you are presenting could be implemented successfully? And we all know bureaucracy of Nepal hindrance. I think that was a major part of your presentation itself. And finally, Persona Colonel says, if time permits, many ministers and leaders are appointed to head critical sectors like health, education, or finance without having expertise in those areas. Shouldn't democratic reform include ensuring that leadership positions are given based on competence rather than just political bargaining? I think since in many of these questions you have either brought into your presentations or answers, so can I ask you to briefly recap it in 3 minutes so that we can conclude this one. Thank you.
Yeah. I think I've covered many of the issues that have been raised in different forms. On brain drain and youth migration, at first we lamented the fact that, all the young talent, fresh talent that we would have needed to power Nepal's economic growth from within have left the country. But that needs an enabling ecosystem, political reforms, on a scientist, Nepali scientist who would be employed in NASA, there's no point in holding him back as we, get our rudimentary stuff aligned, right? So there's a lag that we're willing to tolerate up to a point. What has become a bigger worry now is actually the collapse of the Nepali market. And I was struck the other day, sale of laptops falling down, sale of cosmetics falling, restaurant dining falling, because that core consumer class itself is being emptied, hollowing out of the Nepali market. So forget talent and, vidwanharu aera desh banaune. Forget that. Bazarai sukisakyo. And what is that doing? That's going to imperil the banking sector. That's going to imperil future investments. And people would rather invest in Dubai and find out every means to park their money abroad than engage in investments within Nepal. So that confidence in the economy, asha that I can build my future in this country, that is, I think, has become much more important now than doing tinkering on the margins and saying, the tax kataera lagani badaune ki bhanne. So yesto kuraharu is becoming very important. But I am hopeful, learning again. I take the long view of things. I'm an economist, but a historian by hobby. I take the long view of things, 30, 40, 50 years. Once that economic momentum gets going, things will pick up. India was completely written off for 40 years under the Hindu rate of growth of 3%. Once the economic reforms happened in 1990, look at the dynamism. Vietnam, all the Viet Qs now returning. Taiwan returnees. China returnees. South Korea returnees. So I think, given the demographic structure of many of you in the room, about to retire with substantial savings, hopefully kids sent off to university, we should tempt you back. And it was this diaspora in the initial years of the Chinese opening up after Deng Xiaoping unleashed Gaige Kaifang in 1978. For whole 10 years after that Gaige Kaifang, it was the Chinese diaspora in Macau and Hong Kong and Malaysia and Singapore that did the initial investment. Once that proved to be rewarding, it was then the Westerners who joined in the bandwagon, right? So I'm actually optimistic in the medium run, rather quite depressed in the short term. So that's my picture. But once we pick up, I think things can happen. R&D, etc. I think it's evident. We want to. But my challenge in Nepal in shaping policy discourse has been to make the point that, so I'll give you a concrete example, and we can end with this. I went to Germany. I saw these tiny bottles of Timur, Szechuan pepper from Salyan district. Beautifully processed, beautifully packaged, 10 euros per bottle like this. But it would have been impossible if a Nepali entrepreneur did it. No idea about sanitary and phytosanitary standards, no idea about export markets, no idea about German supermarkets. Bora ka bora Timur nikalera surkhetma thanke aera. Where would you sell? So you need in the early years foreign investors with foreign ideas that bring the market together with the know-how to link our Nepali farmers, Nepali indigenous products, to process them and meet those damn standards, and then make them a success, right? So in Nepal, that jingoism, विदेशी त केही पनि हुँदैन, पुँजी मान्छे कोही अनुहारै देख्न हुँदैन, सब हामी स्वाभिमानी वीर नेपालले गरिहाल्छ नि. That jingoistic rhetoric, which is 50 years outdated, still the legacy persists. It took 60, 70 years to undo the damaging rhetoric that we could sell our surplus clean energy. Now there's unanimity. So it will take a while to also undo some of that damaging doctrinal positions that we've taken when it comes to engagement with the world global commerce, right? So this we need to fix with concrete successes. But let me conclude with the fact that, yeah, right policies चाहिन्छ, सही नीति चाहिन्छ, तर त्योभन्दा पनि ठुलो सफा नियत चाहिँदो रहेछ. र नीति पनि सही, नियत पनि सफा भयो भने त्यसपछि पनि थप कुरा चाहिन्छ, त्यो भनेको क्षमता. अनफोर्चुनेटली हाम्रो अहिलेको पोलिटिकल क्लासको नीति नै पनि गलत धेरै क्षेत्रमा, नियत त छँदै छैन, र नीति र नियत ठिक हुँदा पनि क्षमता छैन. फेरि गर्न त मन लाग्थ्यो भन्ने, तर गर्न नसक्ने क्षमता पनि छैन. So what we will bring to the table, I hope, is sahi niti. This is it for the next 10 years. Single-mindedly यसरी जानुपर्छ, सफा नियत and क्षमता. And for that, we look to you guys also to pitch in your own ways. Thank you so much.
Right, thank you. I'm sorry if we couldn't manage to take more questions, but I think we have successfully addressed all the points raised here. I mean, this is a big topic and we need ongoing discussions. I really appreciate the time provided by Dr. Swarnim Wagle for this thoughtful presentation. And this amazing example, once again, I would like to repeat that, how far we come. It's been possible to run these events even from the base of Everest in a remote area. And I'm also, not really in the urban part, still in Nepal. So I think I am a, kind of hopeful person. So we have made a lot of progress. There's a lot to do. So we need to really go with hope rather than, the sadness that is really, inflicting our country at the moment. So all the participants deserve a special thank you for coming, and there's some of our friends who are very regular, and that's why I would like to call them Sambahak, because this is Nepal Sambat, and this is very, very important. We have recorded this talk, and this soon will be available on YouTube. The next month, as you know, every month, the first Saturday of the month at 10 UK time, we run this Nepal Dialogue. So this month we had this, research-based talk. Next month we will be doing some discussions on the issue of contemporary interest, which we have chosen to be I think the political participation of Nepalis in the UK, and when will a Nepali become an MP in the UK for you, if you like. We haven't finalized the title, but this will be coordinated by our colleague Naris Kapangi, who will be there, and we expect your participation again. And I would like to thank you all once again for your time and energy, and look forward